by the state for the benefit of the society and the potential victims of the crime. We believe that the purpose of such a trial is to establish facts beyond reasonable doubt. It's important because we see the role of the state is to protect its people, and finding the facts is the best way to do so. We see that a public defender is a lawyer appointed by the state and paid for by the state in a criminal trial. I'd also like to define justice and what we understand by it. Since we're establishing the facts in the case, we see that the best interpretation of this is to have procedural justice rather than retributive justice. Thus, our burden on Team Council today is to prove that our system of justice is better ethically and more coherent with our values of justice. We place a burden on Team Opposition to either prove that the existence of a private lawyer doesn't mean that you can be treated differently before the law, or that this inequality is acceptable. So what exactly do we understand by the before the law? We understand this as being procedural justice. We have several criteria. Firstly, we see a fairness in procedure, no thank you. Secondly, we see an unbiased judge, an unbiased jury, fair and equitable. We're following the laws of discovery, and we have suitable time preparation in the case. We also see that according to the 11th article in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, we have the presumption of innocence before proving guilty. And we also see that we have, according to 10A, of the UN Declaration of Rights, that we have justice as equality in full before the law. This does not mean that we can have unequal representation based on non-arbitrary standards such as socioeconomic traits, and also we argue that we have to have an equal opportunity to defense. Retributive justice, on the other hand, deals with solely punishment for no thinking. We see that based on punishment of the potential criminal, and we see this as retribution for society. So what we support, therefore, and what we mean by exclusivity, is that we immediately outlaw private lawyers in criminal trials. We would make up for the shortfall in economic and human resources in our system of public defense by requiring an accused citizen who the status quo is likely to pay for a private lawyer, to employ private lawyers and to pay the state the cost of representation. Thus, our strong case line, is that retributive justice can only be preceded by full procedural justice. It's a logical requirement when we see it as something we can only guarantee on our side of the house. So in our case today, we have 3 points of stand. Firstly, the transcendence of principles of equality before the law. Secondly, that earning money off of the principles of justice is ethically indefensible, no thank you. And thirdly, we say that the principle of popular justice, we argue for the principle of popular procedural justice. So in the first argument, we defend that sacrificing some quality of the defense in the short term is justified if we uphold the principles of procedural justice. First level, I'm going to look at the mechanism of why a private lawyer means an inequality before the law and does not guarantee procedural justice.
Point of information.
Sure.
Your policy gives the state control over the criminal lawyer sector. Aren't the states more likely to pander to rich political patrons at the expense of the poor?
What we say here is that we place in the question of democracy, and we argue that the judicial system should be separate from the state, and that's what is the most status quo. So what we tell you here is that the fundamental difference between a private lawyer and a public lawyer is the access to resources. We tell you that a private lawyer has more resources than they do. They have more resources, including time preparation in any given case. They have more personnel to aid in case construction. Thus, we say that they can present either the same amount of evidence or more evidence in a better fashion that is more suitable to guide the defense. Hence, we say that these people are paying for evidence, and for the evidence to be interpreted in a different way. When we tell you that this reaches what we mean by procedural justice, it reaches what we mean by equality in full before the law, because you're basing the representation on socioeconomic traits. In fact, we see that statistics from the University of Pennsylvania show us that a lower percentage of crimes, represented by a private lawyer are sent to prison. And in the case they are sent to prison, they have a shorter sentence. My second level in this argument is looking at the mechanisms of a private lawyer and how this also means inequality before the law. We tell you that they have the same basic competence level. They have the same basic skill level, but the difference is in the case overload. When there are 100 to 200 cases per year, we tell you that they're underrepresented in comparison to private lawyers. We tell you that they can dedicate less time and they can our side of the house. We have three reasons. Firstly, we believe that equality before the law is a right of a citizen in any Western liberal democracy as it's stated in the Constitution, and we also see that it's a seventh right in the universal rights. We solve this by having the same equality guaranteed in full, regardless of financial situation on our side. Secondly, we see that procedural justice is important because of the consequences that a criminal conviction can lead to. Thus, it can only stand for a verdict that is guaranteed when preceded by procedural justice and not solely based on non-arbitrary. No, thank you. We guarantee this by having fair representation regardless of what your socioeconomic and trade. And my third reason here is we have equality in full via public lawyers because we have that, we can grant this whole system the credibility and the legitimacy to make true verdicts and to protect the rights. So now let's move to my second argument. And here we tell you that profiting off the principle of justice undermines the value and the credibility that we so hold on our side. Why? Because in the status quo, private lawyers exploit their clients' misdemeanors. We tell you that the private lawyers are profiting off a client's inherent right to have equality before the law, and their right to be defended, and their vulnerable situation that they're in right now. Secondly, we tell you that in a profitable market, that we're having a profitable market off the principle of justice and off having the right to fair trial. We highlight that there is inequality before the law, and that there isn't procedural justice in the status quo today, and that it can be gone if you so much please. So, ladies and gentlemen, we see that private lawyers undermine the core values of procedural justice and cripple the justice system and its ability of having a fair trial, and we are so proud to propose a system that guarantees these values.
We too stand for procedural fairness in justice, but side proposition by allowing governments to take charge of both prosecution and defense teams undermines this fairness. We believe that proposition makes the state the judge, jury, and executioner, and that's why we're very proud to stand against public defendants. What is our model? First of all, we oppose entirely the institution of public defenders. No lawyer representing any defendant will ever be employed by the government. Second, with finances that would have otherwise been spent on their employment, we'll greatly expand means-tested legal aid subsidies for private lawyers. This means that poor defendants will receive the largest sums and thus continue to be guaranteed representation. We are also happy for legal firms to continue to offer pro bono services, as is common among firms such as Ropes & Gray LLP and WilmerHale in the USA. This policy has a track record of success in Germany, where there are no public defenders and courts use a means-tested system of legal aid subsidies. We're following three arguments. First, that we uphold the separation of powers. Second, that we reduce the risk of collusion. And my second speaker will tell you that we preserve the client-lawyer relationship. But before that, let's deal with the case by asking two questions. First, are private lawyers distortive in equity? Second, do they really profit off justice? First, are private lawyers distortive? They told us that private lawyers are bad because they have access to better resources and as a consequence can distort the course of procedural justice. Let's break this myth. We think that having access to better resources doesn't mean you can bribe judges. It doesn't lead to and doesn't undermine the principle of equality before the law. Because checks and balances in the justice system to prevent these kind of abuses from occurring. But okay, even if they have some degree of historical influences, and even if rich defendants might be entitled to perhaps slightly better defense, we think the uniform appointment of public defendants for all defenders, rich or poor, at the state's expense is an incredibly blunt policy in pursuit of equity. We'd much rather on our side expand the scope of means-tested legal aid subsidies so private lawyers can continue to compete in the free market. So everyone, rich or poor, can have access to a private lawyer which will be attracted by better wages. Moreover, we think that state-appointed public defenders might be worse for the poor. Why? Because often, governments have an incentive to undercut people who don't have powerful lobby groups, to provide the least qualified public defenders, or perhaps the worst public defenders to individuals who aren't politically powerful, who don't hold sway over political patrons, over lobby groups. The response to all of this, in a point of information, was that in Western liberal democracies, these things don't happen. We think that this is an incredibly naive assumption, given that governments, even in the most Western liberal democracies, are still bound to popular pressures, and therefore are still bound to the ballot box and might have perverse incentives. They said, we want the separation of the state and justice. Exactly. That's why, when they allow governments to control the supposedly independent defense of people convicted or accused of crimes, they undermine the separation of powers between state and justice. The next assertion was that once we hire more lawyers, in the long term, justice and representation will be better. We disagree. Once there are more public defenders, in fact, when all lawyers are public defenders, the standard of public defenders will decline. The reason for this is that the best budding lawyers will choose to opt to enter contract or corporate law instead, because once the state pays public defenders at less competitive wages, the criminal sector will stop being attractive to these individuals. No, thank you. Secondly, is it unjust to profit off justice? They said that private lawyers profit off the rights of a defendant. Well, we think that public defenders are paid a wage as well, so their motives still lie with profit. Moreover, we think that many people choose to join legal services and criminal law, do so out of a genuine want to represent their clients, a genuine want to further justice. So you can't just castigate all of them by saying that they're working for the profit motive. That's their case dealt with. I'm going to transition now to my first argument about how we uphold the separation of powers. I'll be proving to you that the state monopoly of the law prevents clients from getting access to fair trial. The foundation of this argument is that Team Sweden's policy allows governments to monopolize the justice system. Why? Because all lawyers become public defenders. Governments become the employers, paymasters, and overseers of both prosecution and defense teams. This undermines the right to fair trial, as governments have structural incentives that run counter to those of defendants, even in Western liberal democracies. This leads to a conflict of interest, which manifests in a number of ways. For instance, to win the vote of racist electorates, governments can allocate their most poorly qualified public defenders to immigrants or minorities in order to raise conviction rates or to burnish their anti-crime record. Something similar has already happened in the UK, where immigrants were recently denied the right to public defense. Moreover, governments may also be prejudicial to their political patrons. White-collar criminals who come from the same lobby groups that fund their political parties may receive the best defenses at the expense of poor clients. You disagree?
No, yes, I do. In most countries, the justice system and the judicial system is separate from the state and the government.
Yes, it is separate in name, but the way the governments allocate defenders are still incredibly opaque. There's a huge latitude for governments to abuse the power that they grant them once they pay for the wages of all public defenders and there are no private lawyers. That's our answer. Moreover, we think that governments will also encourage public defenders to shut down politically unsavory accusations. This happened in 2011, when Texan public defenders pressured 3 clients to drop charges of police coercion and brutality, even though they maintained their innocence. Therefore, institutional biases inherently make states ill-equipped to allocate public defenders. Why is our side better? Because all cases will be taken on by private lawyers. Private lawyers are apolitical, as they are not paid or employed by the state. Hence, they are not bound to institutional popular pressures. We protect defendants, especially the marginalized. Black youth in the USA will no longer be awarded inferior public defenses and denied fair trial. Moreover, on our side, pro bono lawyers from private firms remain free to assist the marginalized, something that they deny because the government owns the justice system. Therefore, Team Sweden's policy in the movement leads to structural government abuses and is hence unjust. Yes?
Don't you think that private lawyers also have institutional biases against the
Yes, but the great thing about the free market is that it corrects for these biases. Lawyers' reputations are at stake if they collude with judges, for instance. These incentives don't exist in the case of public defenders because they are guaranteed clientage. Moving swiftly on, we think that we reduce the risk of collusion. This is my second argument, because public defenders have a perverse incentive to collude with prosecutors at the expense of their clients. First, the reason for this is their workloads increase dramatically. When private lawyers are banned, public defenders have to take on all criminal cases, foisting upon them an impossible burden. Moreover, the long-run pool of criminal lawyers will shrink substantially, since most budding lawyers will choose to enter corporate or contract law instead. With too few lawyers saddled with too many cases, many will feel tempted to expedite the process. Even the most diligent and well-meaning public defenders will find themselves with hard choices to make. This means that they will pressure clients to accept plea bargains, for instance, or persuade them against appealing unfair verdicts. Moreover, they could also advise their clients to accept plead guilty and accept plea bargains offered by prosecutors. That's why we think that the average New Orleans public defender who takes on 800 cases every year encourages 90% of their clients to plead guilty on first opportunity. Their side consigns all defenders to this fate. This problem is worsened by the wage structure of public defenders who tend to operate on flat wage rates. This means that excess working hours spent representing clients in court, for instance, won't be rewarded, and as a consequence, they've been incented to conclude cases a lot faster. Why is our side better? Because the wage structure of private lawyers rewards time spent in court, since they are not paid by the hour. They have no incentive to swiftly conclude cases via plea bargains, and will instead fight cases to their proper conclusion. Moreover, since their reputations are at stake, they have every incentive to represent their clients as well. Therefore, Team Sweden's policy is not only unjust, it increases the risk of unethical behavior. We're very proud of this.
Speakers for 8 minutes and 9 seconds.
I thank the first opposition speaker for his speech. And now to continue the case for the proposition, I call upon Axel Notler.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we on side opposition have 4 points of contention with the case that side opposition have been bringing in this case. On fair trials or procedural justice, on how governments will pander to the rich, on the separation of powers, and on how people will not become public defenders. On the first point, on fair trials and procedural justice, we say that the court of law and procedural justice is not only about presentation, it is about representation. And what we mean by this is that criminal trials rarely have facts that are clear-cut. Instead, the role of a lawyer within a criminal trial is to interpret evidence, something we argue is easier and can be better done when you have an entire law firm behind you and more time to spend on a case than you can on your own as a public defender. We said legal analysts agree in the Dose case, for example. We hear this that money can't buy a judge. No, the money can buy time and better interpretation, better representation of your case in front of the trial, and that is what matters. Once again, no thank you sir, I refer to my burden that we put on them. If private lawyers are not better in any way, why would anyone be paying for them? So then we heard, on to the second point, a POI argument on how the government will pander to the rich and influential. We said there are two ways in which the government and the rich or influential can interplay. Firstly, they can collude, that they can in effect create a corrupt system where the rich are favored in the courts of law. But we say that then the rest of the people will lose out. They will be subjected to an even worse legal system than
What information?
No, thank you, sir. We say that they get an even worse system than they do in the status quo. Therefore, they will eventually oust the government because, as they've talked about, we have public pressure in Western liberal democracies as well. The other way they conclude that we're sending my substantive. No, thank you, sir. Now we're going to talk about the separation of powers and how we heard the governments will monopolize defenders, but we say that the judicial system is still separate, and we say that no, the government does not allocate public defenders. We say that there will be a public defender office doing that, separate although funded by the state. We say that they won't have direct influence over who gets allocated, at least that's what inherent to our model. We also heard that people will not become public defenders. We disagree. We say, firstly, in most countries in the world, they already do. Despite more money to be made. I'll take you in a second, sir, elsewhere. But we also say that even in Singapore, for example, this will happen. And I will show you that in my substantive. But first, yes.
If private lawyers are so good, why not use subsidies to make sure everyone can access them?
I'm going to talk about that in my substantive. And my third speaker is going to deal with that as well. So, moving into my substantive, we're going to talk about the principle of popular procedural justice. And this comes in two parts. Firstly, how we improve the system of public defense through public pressure, and secondly, on the relative balance between prosecution and defense and what it implies about the state's role in society. So on to the first point, how we get better public defense. We said there are already mechanisms in society for improving the system of public defense. Activists like Karen Hooper or Robert Baruchowicz working for higher spending and the American Bar Association recommending an equilibrium between spending on prosecution and defense. We said there's a demand for change. But there's a lack of political influence in these actors, and they don't have the financial means to effect change. No, thank you, sir. While previously rich and influential people would have turned to private lawyers, under our model, they are subjected to the system of public defense, leading them to use their influence, and here comes the second wave of interplay between rich people and the government. Use their influence and money to affect, no thank you sir, politicians and voters to spend more on public defense because they stand to benefit from that themselves, and it is a sustainable way of doing it. So eventually spending on public defense will move towards an equilibrium with how much spent on prosecution. So in the long term, responding to the other point, we said we can hire more lawyers, give them higher pay, competing perhaps with some private law firms, although not all. Give them continuing education so we improve their quality, just as we do for prosecutors. So this means better representation for those who can't afford private lawyers. This means less plea bargains, and instead people daring to actually take their case to trial, in contrast to taking a plea bargain to avoid the farce of a trial for which they are improperly represented. So on to my second point. I'm going to prove that the ethical situation under, no thank you sir, opposition's model is that states are punitive institutions. I'm going to use geometric method to structure my analysis. This argument is based on two axes. Firstly, that the state is a politically determined entity answerable to its subjects, and secondly, that procedural justice is ontologically prior to retributive justice. Concurrent upon these two axioms, we present three postulates. One, the state has responsibility to protect its subjects, which follows from axiom 1 that the state is a politically determined entity answerable to its subjects. We say secondly, the state must first attend to the right to procedural justice of its subject before measuring out whatever retributive justice is deemed fit. This is due to axiom 2, that procedural justice is ontologically prior, no thank you sir, to retributive justice. Thirdly, we say that the state is violating the principle in nearly all countries of procedural justice. So on the basis of these three postulates, we make three logical propositions, as will be our right in the debating competition. We say that firstly, the state invests more on prosecution than defense. No, thank you, sir, and I give you some proof instead. US prosecutors have 25% more cases, but have 300% higher funding. And And this isn't even an extreme example. In fact, the world in total spends 1.8 times more on prosecution than on all legal aid. So, secondly, we said if a subject is accused of a crime, the state then invests more on prosecuting that subject than defending it. No, thank you. Approved Proposition 1. Thirdly, we said there's a discrepancy between prosecution and defense budgets in trials, and we said that means a disparity in the effectiveness of prosecution and defense. And as a corollary to this, we say the public prosecutors should, no thank you sir, have a financial advantage over public defenders. Once again, the statistics in Proposition 1 are uncompromising. And this returns us to Postulate 3. Almost all states are violating the principle of procedural justice. We find that this is true because there's no longer a level playing field or a legal discourse. There's no longer full equality before the law. Once again, we point to no thanks to Article 11 of Human Rights. Now, let's look what this means in ethical terms. Based on these three postulates, we argue a fourth proposition, that if the state's policy is to prioritize prosecution over defense, then it is more interested in prosecuting than defending. Proof for this is not only the fact that private defense lawyers exist, but some countries even deny the right, and under their model, every country denies the right to public defender, just as Singapore does in the status quo. So, and the fifth proposition, any state more interested in prosecution than defense is more interested in punishing subjects accused of a crime than protecting these subjects' right, intrinsic right to procedural justice. So from these two propositions, you new postulates. In opposition model, the state is a primarily punitive institution. And in reference to Axiom 1, a fifth proposition, since the state is a politically determined entity answerable to its subject, no state can be legitimate should it be a primarily punitive institution. And from this we get a final proposition that if a majority of states in the world now are to remain legitimate, we must change, we must leave opposition's model dead on the ground. The only way in which we can avoid this ethical problem is outlawing private lawyers, incentivizing society to equalize the balance between prosecution and defense. And we see that this won't happen in status quo or under opposition's model because ultimately there's a vested interest in society where the most influential, most rich people will get the best private lawyers benefiting them, but not the people. Proposition is the way to go.
Speakers spoke for 8 minutes and 8 minutes and a half.
Please stop bells until we get past 8:15. Right, okay. That's what happened in the previous room. I think that's reasonable. I mean, the debaters are almost going to go over, but start trying to get them to stop when we get to 8:15 and not before that. Otherwise, I'm getting far. Thank you.
I thank the second proposition speaker for his speech. And now to continue the case for opposition, I call upon Brian.
Team Proposition's case was misguided, concessionary, and sometimes informed with wrongs.
we're going to look at two issues. First, let's talk a little bit about equality before the law. But second, the bigger issue about how do we provide the best defense for all defendants. Before I talk a little bit about the client-lawyer relationship and how we upgrade it better. First, a small point on equality before the law. The debate has evolved, but they were a little bit unresponsive, so speaking very clear. Our first speaker has already told you that this debate is no longer about equality before the law, and the point people are providing a uniform system on the side. So they will provide a uniform public defense system. We will give subsidies to provide a uniform private defense system. So this page should become clear by now. The question is whether or not the private defense is better than the public defense. And for many of these instances, they already admitted that private defenses get more time, often, I hope, better defenses. Like this, we only want to be able to look a little bit more at this issue. Moreover, we ensure equality better by showing that we don't pay for large corporations like Apple and Samsung by sending private defenders when they clearly don't really want to defend them. So, what we do by using these as the subsidies for legal provisions is that we ensure that the state does not provide for individuals who can already provide for themselves. So, on all these grounds, we believe this debate is not equality. In fact, it's about who provides the best defense.
Please, can I tell you that private lawyers you can also pay for private lawyers for different quality, and therefore it's still non-arbitrary means.
Okay, sure. So you can go for private defenders of different quality. You would say we would increase legal subsidies to ensure that people can pay for better private lawyers if they want to do so. In any case, we believe that at least we will remove the disparity that private lawyers have between public defenders as well. As you already admitted that private lawyers have more time but better defense, so we believe that what they compare with, we still provide in general a better defense.
On that point,
So, more on this, how we provide a better defense. Like, we argue for the separation of powers. We do not believe the separation of power can ever be established when a state appoints the judges, the prosecutors, and the lawyers. They claim we have a public defender's office. Okay, fact check. You know who funds the public defender's office? The state. Researchers very often this means that there is no separation of power. A very common example, the joint political boundaries is always said to be done by an independent entity or a state, a political body. But in fact, there are huge accusations of gerrymandering all around the world. Because at the point at which the state funds your office, it is very difficult to pull the interests apart. So, separation of powers was an argument they never really refuted. We believe we better uphold this since they already said in the first speaker that it is an important value for legal justice. Second, they claim, I quote that first speaker, there is less time on each case for a public defender, so it provides a simple defense. The second speaker says defenses are done better with more time. You can see where this is going, because team opposition has already admitted. At the point at which you provide a public defender to every single defendant, you are removing his right to free and fair representation, or at least not the best one that can be afforded. We believe it is terrible for a defense to provide what they call a simple defense. But what really just means expediting the trial by forcing defendants to play into plea bargains, forcing their defendants to plead guilty at every point in time. We suggest, on this second speaker's mention of punitive nature of justice, they didn't know worse, and the point at which they give simple defenses were often leading to guilty. We argue this in the first speaker, you heard numerous times. Moreover, we say very often that the rich will not fund public defenders to the extent in which you benefit everyone, which was their client policy against speaker, and their only justification and refutation against collusion on the series of other arguments came from first speaker. So why will the rich not fund a public defense? First, they will divert just enough, knowing that they will be granted the best public defender anyway. So, I will fund the best of public defender and eventually be allocated that. The poor is still going to get the worst of them. Second, even if they admit the rich cannot fund individual defenders, the state still has finite budget, and very often this means an overall decrease in the number of lawyers, leading to more overworked lawyers and even less time spent on cases. Third, even if well-funded public defender is still structurally worse, and that is why this argument was never really a refutation to collusion to begin with, because collusion was the innate for the public defense. So no matter how much you fund it, collusion still happens. Even the second speaker admitted that states invest so much more in prosecutors than they do in defense, which already admits collusion is likely to happen because prosecutors have so much more power to ask him a guilty plea. And for these reasons, if you are very likely on the comparative of provide a right private defense which can fund itself and provide a compelling defense against prosecutors which is state funded. For these reasons, we believe we ensure the best defense. My argument for today, how they impinge upon the client-lawyer relationship, and this is one more reason why we provide a better defense. In fact, why we provide a right to meaningful representation. Because this argument is that clients are able to trust public defenders and as such, hurts fair representation. This begins with the foundation that the client-lawyer relationship is unique. In trials of immense gravity, lawyers must be trusted with full, honest disclosure of information for them to build a robust case in their defense. Defendants must therefore trust their representatives sufficiently in order to disclose information timely and know that they'll still be represented in court. Very often, critical information is personal. For example, the sexual history of a suspected rapist attempting to clear the state. It is not information he would comfortably reveal if he did not trust his lawyer, since sexual history is such a private affair. In short, defendants must be allowed access to lawyers they trust to have their right to meaningful legal representation. If you actually like to undermine this, please.
Taking it back to the previous point, all lawyers have incredibly strict rules on what and laws on what they can say and not say. You can trust any lawyer no matter where he is.
Okay, so this is what trust. I'm going to show you why trust has happened. So this is now for this. The uniform appointment of public defenders erodes the trust, and I'll state you to respond to this QI as well. Defendants have highly limited control over the profile of lawyers they are assigned and eventually represented by. Many criminals also fear a defender who is on the payroll of the state, a person who is in the region's discount. The problem is worse in corrupt and unaccountable judicial systems like Brazil or Hungary, where defendants are only continually brutalized or deceived into false testimonies about their guilt by state-appointed agents like police. Public defenders, similarly under the employ of the corrupt government, will not inspire more trust. In Haiti, for instance, public defenders frequently disclose private exchanges with their defendants to facilitate their detention without trial, rather than building a defense as they should for their defendants. Whether this in fact happens in every case is not the point. The argument is that at the point in which people believe or perceive their defender to be a member of the state and be one who is taking and leaking information out to state actors, that is the point in which they will not trust their public defender. In fact, a former American Legal Services Institute found that 95% of defendants would not trust their public defender, and in 30% of these cases, an appeal by a private counsel shared green light sufficient to warrant a retrial and sometimes an acquittal. How is our side better? We afford defendants the right to choose their lawyers. Psychologically, this makes them significantly more likely to open up to their lawyers, knowing that this is one that they chose themselves. We ensure that clients do not prematurely censor themselves in their information because they do not trust their lawyers. We uphold the client-lawyer relationship. We provide the best defense, and for all these reasons, we stand very firmly on team opposition.
Speakers vote for 8 minutes and 4 minutes.
I thank the second opposition speaker for his speech. And now to continue the case for the proposition, I call upon Warda Deron.
Taking into account all the benefits Singapore outlined for private lawyers and all the ways they tell us private lawyers are achievable for the rich, in no way are they achieving procedural justice and equality before the law. That is what we do on our side, where we exclusively require everyone to have the same access to public defense and hence organically improve it for everyone. A human right that is in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. I have three questions I'll be asking you. First, what do we do for justice? Second, what do we do for defendants? And finally, what do we do for public defense? But before I delve into my very first question, let's just take a look at their model and how it has failed to achieve the very basic thing they thought they were achieving. Now, they want the best defense for those who can afford it, that the state shouldn't intervene in this with private lawyers. But the very definition of equality before the law, which, like we said, down the entire definition, includes equally good access to prosecution and defense, equal spending on both, and equal access to representation before the law. Now, how are they not fulfilling it? Firstly, there's a huge disparity between the government budget going towards prosecution and public defense. So we think that the poor are seriously castigated when public defense does not have enough finances as does prosecution. But secondly, we think under their model, the rich will always have better representation in front of trials available to them simply because of their socioeconomic status where they are able to afford a better lawyer.
What information?
First, what do we do for justice? My first question. Now, Axel told you that we will improve the quality of public defense in the long term, and this will guarantee a greater quality before the law, especially for the indigent. Now, we already have activism in place, as Axel talked about, in public defense, but we need the voices of the rich, of the powerful, so they realize and put pressure on the state to increase the quality. Why is this necessary? Because otherwise, the state becomes a punitive institution, as Axel proved in his two axioms, that firstly, the state is politically answerable to its subject, and secondly, that procedural justice is ontologically concurrent on retribution. Without an equality in spending on prosecution and defense, we are legitimizing an illegitimate form of a state, close to a semi-totalitarian way of a state, where the poor and the indigent are seriously misrepresented. Yes.
Ensuring quality by the law, by providing legal subsidies for individuals to get private lawyers. The state's basically working with this, which you do with this.
Alright, first, where is that money going to come from to be able to subsidize all these private lawyers that cost so much? And secondly, we think private lawyers are very picky with who they choose to represent. The good private lawyers will pick the rich, whom they can make a lot of profit from doing their job. So we still think that under your model, by having private lawyers and not giving them out on an arbitrary basis, we'll still have the rich getting better representation because they have the better private lawyers, because there is the profit incentive. On our side, when public defense is for everybody, we ensure equality before the law. Now they give us this point where they talk about how they reduce collusion in public defense and prosecutions, and now the state is involved everywhere. But Singapore has made a huge issue of tension right here. Because in the status quo, this quality of defense, where the poor are sometimes pragmatically forced to take plea bargains, because public defenders do not have enough resources or the means, time to spend with their clients, this is the problem in the status quo. This is not procedural justice. That is why we require it on an exclusive basis, where everybody needs public defense and where nobody is to accept a plea bargain just because he's indigent. That is not the criteria for why you should be unequally represented in front of the law. Otherwise, Team Singapore are not abiding by the tenet of being innocent until proven guilty. Because we see that many some people are forced to accept plea bargains and not stand in their trials. Why? Because simply the public defenders do not have the means and time to take their time with these poor people. So essentially we see that poor people in front of criminal trials are not seen as innocent before proven guilty. Because
because they're never put on trial because of unequal representation. On our side, we give them that equal representation, the equal representation they deserve. Moving on to my second question. No.
Which is what?
No. What do we do for defendants? Now they tell us that governments have too much power in jurisdiction, and you know that there will be corruption and things like that. But first, we tell you that public defenders are handed out in Western liberal democracies on an arbitrary basis, where there's a separation of power and checks and balances in place. Why is this so? Because it is in the interest of Western liberal democracies to ensure legitimate court procedures and criminal trials. Why is this so? Because Western liberal democracies often operate on having a legitimate image in the international spectrum, and they only have so when they can be able to provide equality before the law. That is what we do on our side. But let's look at the comparative. Let's look at how private lawyers treat and take their people. We tell you, like I already said in a response to a UI, the private lawyers are profit incentivized, and we think towards the indigent that is an equal castigation as they think we will be doing. The private lawyers who want to make money will take on the rich cases that can win and that they can profit from, not the poor that need equal representation just like they do. That ties in to our argument. We talk about private lawyers in criminal trials cripple equality before the law because they have more resources, they have bigger networks, and more time to spend with their clients. What were their responses? First thing, they tell us that private lawyers aren't actually better because, you know, there's equal evidence and equal resources. But we tell you that the fact of the matter lies in the time and the network these private lawyers can spend with their defendants. And that is more done on private lawyers. So moving on to the last question. What do we do for public defense? And here we hear a substantive. Here we hear a substantive from the second speaker talking about how there's a bad relationship, you know, between public defenders and their clients, and that this bad relationship will decrease the representation. But we tell you that what we are not okay with is that this is the situation for the poor and not the rich. We are not okay with public defenders being given to the poor, to the indigent, and them being fearful and afraid of public defenders and not being able to build a stable relationship. If we are to, in the short term, reduce the quality of public defense and sometimes have bad relationship with our public defense, we want to do this across the entire plane of all defenders. We do not want the rich to simply consistently and constantly be getting a better relationship with their lawyers just because they have the money to hire a private lawyer. And this is what we told you in Julia's second substantive, which talked about how private lawyers, it is wrong, it violates the principles of justice when the private lawyers make money off of justice like this. So what have we shown you on Team Sweden today? We've shown you that the principles of justice, procedural justice, equality before the law, rests on this one pinnacle where everybody has access to similar types of representation on a basis that the rich cannot constantly exploit to their own benefit by having money to hire private lawyers. We think also that on your side you have a state that is a punitive institution with disparity between spending on prosecution and public defense. On both our sides, we fix these two issues. We have a legitimate state and legitimate equal representation for everyone. Go.
Now to continue the case by opposition, I call it law and SWE.
They say, oh no, team opposition concedes that public defenders are bad due to plea bargaining. There's a tension, it concedes the poor are hurt, so we lose. No, they've missed the relevant comparative. From the beginning of this debate, and this was why their third speech was irrelevant, we said we oppose all public defenders. We will make sure that every single person hires a private lawyer. So all the things that they told us are just irrelevant. The question of this debate is, do we create equality by subjecting no one or everyone to injustice? And we've answered that we don't want anybody to be susceptible to the immense perverse incentives of plea bargaining and many more. I'll answer this debate and this question in two questions. One, who preserves equality before the law? Second, who ensures fair trial in general for everybody? First, on equality. Now, the most bizarre thing about Team Students' case is we can agree with most of it. We can agree procedural justice matters. We can agree money right now speaks too much and too loudly in the courtroom. We can agree equality is important. We can agree sometimes a punitive state is wrong. The question of this debate is how do they meet these end goals? And honestly, the shit was like, that case was like shit, passing hours in the night because it never answered the key questions, which was how do we get to those end goals? Because we agree those are important. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why our team and not theirs meets the end goal that both teams agree are important. The equality. The first reason is why it's our team is because we do not shackle defendants to perverse governmental incentives. We said their team is bad because they make governments the paymasters both of prosecutors and defendants. This is bad because they will deliberately undermine the defenses of the poor, racial minorities, and those who make politically unsavory accusations in their defenses. What did we hear? But we are place-setting this debate in Western liberal democracies. That's not a problem. What they will do is fund the office but not control it. An oxymoron in the highest order if I ever heard one. Honestly guys, I'll let you know a secret. That's exactly what our government tells us when they decide electoral boundaries and gerrymander all the same. The fundamental institution that is funding makes coerced control and perverse incentives inseparable from that institution. At any time when the salary of a person is bound to somebody else, I would submit that power is asymmetric in that relationship. And consequently, governments will still, even if they claim they don't control the allocation. What does this mean? This means that consequently, it's racial minorities and the poor who are hurt because the poor don't have enough political and lobbying power to be important. So they'll still be allocated the worst public defenders, their side, and trenches that asymmetry rather than rectifies it. Alright, or to this analysis even further. Why don't they engage us on all countries apart from the best liberal democracies? How about Pakistan? How about India? How about Singapore? We've said no thank you, and I will point out right now, no thank you, that it is in these democracies that wealth disparities are most evident because governments come to power by agreeing to a select elite base. So, to be sure, their case is if you're poor, you're oppressed, and you deserve our help, unless you're in a democracy that's not the beautiful country of Sweden. If you're living in Singapore, Pakistan, your rights don't matter. We don't want to debate you on this area because it's too hard. So, to be sure, they don't really believe in equality. They believe in equality where it's convenient for their case, and they will leave the most poor and the most hurt behind. That's unconscionable and we don't stand for it. What is the upshot of this point? Consequently, we've said perverse electoral incentives still exist. This means that lawyers in Texas will still encourage defendants to drop cases because they accuse policemen of coercing a confession out of them. Politicians don't want to be sullied with these terrible accusations, so they will tell them not to appeal. We've said this means that immigrants will be denied fair trial because they will be denied a public defender or just allocated the worst ones. This means that African American youth who the whole society really hates right now will be given the worst defenders so that they've been convicted. And governments can say, look guys, we're tough on crime, we're protecting you, we're locking up the scourge and the cause of crime safely behind bars. We've said we oppose all of that. It's exactly for the separation of powers that they do us never second, they principally support to remake our case today. So for all these reasons, the greatest threat to equality is not the present asymmetry resources, we told you we will solve. It is perverse electoral incentives that lock in this asymmetry. Alright, let's accept that this asymmetry present in resources does exist. How does our team address it? We said we address it by having a more discriminatory and a less blunt allocation of resources. Here's the comparative. We want to help the poor too. Just that we target the poorest and those who actually need resources were means testing based on income level. Hold on, their side would spend money on every single person, even the CEOs of Apple and Samsung who honestly don't need to have a defendant at the state's expense. I'd like to know from this video why that's right.
You do realize that the private lawyers you are subsidizing will also cherry pick their crimes and will represent, the better private lawyers will represent the more rich and the more better.
I'm sorry, they currently pander to the rich because the rich can give them more money. At the point we give pour money to pay these lawyers, I suspect that the really selfish and profit-motivated private lawyers, as you characterize, would quite like that money. So if they really only handed to the rich, I suspect their market pool will be so small as to drive them out of a job. That's our response to you. So our system is a more nuanced allocation of resources. We've said we'll help the poor as well. We'll give them legal aid subsidies so as they can hire their own private lawyers. And there's absolutely no reason, therefore, why we can't do this. They asked us in their first speaker, really, where's the money coming from? Our response is the same way that you're funding your policy, or the money you'll give to every single public defender to cover your system. You use all of that money to have a huge legal aid subsidy, so that the rich private lawyers will still want to subsidize poor people who now have more legal aid subsidies. So first and foremost, there's like entrenches state tyranny. That's not okay with us. And second, who ensures fair trial in general? No thank you. The first way they don't do this is by ensuring collusion. Here are 3 reasons why collusion is systemic. 1, because their public defenders will be overworked, yet, and therefore have a perverse incentive to expedite cases. We said, when they grant private lawyers, public defenders have to make up for the shortfall. This means they take on an impossible burden. No response. We said in the long run, states can't match the private wage rate, so criminal lawyers will ultimately become corporate or civil ones. No response, other than they claim in their second speaker, one-liner that they're not in it for the money. This is a schizophrenic characterization. In your first speaker, you notice that they're exploitative, they grab money. They're exploitative because they profit at the expense of people who just made one mistake. Hold on, so first and foremost, there's tension. But second, I was something that there are gradations of greed. At some point, when you lose too much money, you will leave the sector. So that's our response to you as well. Yes?
We need to talk about money. Do you not agree that private lawyers can vary in quality and that the rich will still, under your model, be able to get the best lawyers and that the poor, funded by the state, still get bad?
If you think that financial asymmetry exists, we'll give the poor more money. We'll give them so much money as to make sure this financial asymmetry almost doesn't exist. Comparatively, that's a lot better than the structural government incentives that you need to tell us or you can rectify. That's our response to you. Second reason why collusion is systemic, because of the wage rate. We said their policy of a flat wage rate doesn't reward overtime. This means people will exploit cases so that they can deal with less cases for the exact same pay. Again, no response. Third, using that precise logic, prosecutions presently wield too much power. You know what this really means, as my second speaker told you, but again, to which they had no response. This means that it's the easy option for public defenders just to engage in a plea bargain because they have no realistic chance of beating a prosecutor who did tells us is too well funded. So for these 3 systemic reasons, let's lead to the perverse incentive that our side told you existed from our first speaker. This means that plea bargaining exists. And plea bargaining is bad because lawyers trick their individuals and their clients into pleading guilty, even if they maintain their innocence. This, and not the other arguments that we heard from their side, is what entrenches an unfair trial. We're not alright with that as well. We told just further in our second speaker's constructive argument that this is bad for the relationship between the client and the lawyer. We said often the client has to trust his lawyer immensely due to private information. They again had no response to this. You know what this means? This means that clients will not be candid or honest with their lawyers. It means that their lawyers will lead them and give them the wrong advice. For instance, they will advise them to plead not guilty. When they've been proved guilty, but just too scared and too mistrustful to tell the lawyer. And consequently, when they eventually found out to actually have been guilty, they get a significantly higher sentence because they will not cooperate. We're not fine with that either. So because of collusion, because of the tarnished relationship, their side is bad for fair trial as well. Consequently, because our team champions equality and fair trial, I'm so proud to stand in our position.
Speakers spoke for 8 minutes and 8 seconds. of WSDC. We will now move on to the teams 4 minutes including reply speeches. The opposition will deliver the reply speech first. There are no points of information during reply speeches. After 3 minutes, the timekeeper will signal once to let the speaker know that they have 1 minute left. After 4 minutes, the timekeeper will signal twice. To deliver the opposition's reply speech, I call upon Brian.
Let us look at the two worlds that emerged in today's debate. The world of the proposition began as a very narrow, unified, Western liberal democracy. But that aside, the world of the proposition was one that was rife with inequality, where the rich are allocated less public defenders and the poor are sadly with the poorest. Sometimes, when there were moments of equality in the world of the proposition, there was an equal fear of public defenders, an equal mistrust of your assigned work, and equal fear that he might leak out information to the state to prosecute you rather than your defense. They were equally subject to the whims and fancies of the state, regardless of social economic background. That's equality, a pretty terrible equality. The world of the proposition was a world where there was no separation of power, where states allocate and pay for lawyers, judges, and prosecutors, where states already control so many officers they could need to be able to go just to trick you when elections come. Individuals are forced into plea bargains to plead guilty simply because prosecutors are funded so much more in the opposition, more admitted than the private defender that they will ever get. And so they never get a real defense. Truly, they were a world of poor defense. Because by removing the private defense sector, they settle the public defense with every single case that comes by. And mind you, 60% of lawyers are private defenders. So they're going to take that workload and throw it onto that small 40%. And therefore 40% might shrink over time, realizing that as a public defender, you might never be able to become a private defender without their experience. They give them, I hope, less time and I hope a worse defense. So I didn't even need to prove this because they already admitted they were a world of poor defense. But more importantly, they were a world of contradictions. When formed first, they claim public lawyers provide a simple defense because they have less time. And by third, they said we need to give the poor more time. Okay? So if you take that logic, don't give the poor public defenders, and they're doing just that. They were a world of contradictions in policy, in argumentation, they were confused. But moreover, they were a world, most importantly, who lacked a response, who fought so hard against the status quo, but forgot that in this debate today, there was never the comparative. The comparative was between a public defense system and a fully funded, through legal means, legal subsidies, private defense system. So in their fight against the status quo, sure, they did a pretty good job, but they missed the entire comparative and missed what the debate was really about. In the world of the opposition, we realize the expensive system of public defenders can be abolished and the money can be used to subsidize the poor. And it is expensive because their second speaker says, we will pay them a competitive wage that can, I hope, match the private sector. So, in fact, ironically, ours could possibly be cheaper, and the point in which we don't fund Samsung and Apple whose CEOs can clearly afford the legal fees themselves. We separate powers and ensure lawyers do not have perverse incentives to make you and force you to plead guilty. We ensure trust between the client and the lawyer, which is of utmost importance to ensure meaningful legal representation. And moreover, with this trust, we can ensure the best defense is granted truly. With more time and resources on the part of a private defender, we correct the asymmetries as they are able to exist between prosecutors and public defense. By pushing up your defense, pushing up your lawyer with more resources to invest into your individual case and take ownership over your case, rather than letting another one decide. And for all these reasons, team opposition stood very firmly on the principle that the state should never be judge, jury, and executioner.
Speakers will for 4 the case for our proposition and the debate as a whole, I call upon the region.
We clashed in quality. We clashed to show that their model has all the problems in the status quo, if not worse, when their private doors because they vary in quality and non-arbitrary. In my reply speech, I asked 3 questions. Firstly, who upholds the principle of justice? Secondly, is there inequality or equality before laws? And thirdly, who offers a better defense? So in my first question, who upholds the principle of justice? We gave you criteria and what we mean by this. We told you that first and foremost, we need to have equality in full before the law. We need to have procedural justice, and we need to have presumption. In my second argument, we told you how it's ethically indefensible to make profits off of the principles of justice. We tell you it's wrong to make profit off procedural justice. It's wrong to make profit off the intrinsic right to have equality in full. And we told you that it undermines the value and the credibility of the justice system. Their response was used. Public lawyers also have a paid wage. Well, my third speaker made a clear statement that a paid wage is not the same as a profit. Instead, we heard that their model solves this by everybody having the right to choose a private lawyer and somehow we give procedural justice and that this profit is justified. We tell you no, again, there's a difference between a wage and a profit. And we still say that their model profits off the law, so they haven't justified that. We also told you how Axel's latter arguments about punitive institutions and how we made in a certain state legitimate. We had no response on this, and it came very early in the speech. We had 2 different speakers allowing them to reply. So we argued that you must take that into account because it is of big value on our side of the house and not on our side of the house. So in the second question, is there equality in the before the law? We told you that on our side, there is inequality in the status quo and on their side. We told you in the status quo, private lawyers have more access to resources. And we told you public lawyers have less access to resources. So in effect, they still have different quality. Their response was with their model here. Private lawyers for everyone gives everyone better defense. Well, what we tell you here is private lawyers seek out profit in nature. We tell you that you can pay different quality if you have more money. We tell you that private lawyers are selective, and we argue this through our entire case and embrace procedural justice in their model. Their only response to this was that we have collusion and power in the sole hand system. What we argue here is that the justice system is independent from the state. We told you already that we reached their criteria of inequality for the law, and therefore those arguments in this whole clash also come out. So this last question, which I'm quite disappointed that team opposition hasn't really responded to. We told you who offers better defense, both for the indigent and the non-indigent. We told you here that we see a better defense. We told you we have a better defense because we have equal, ethical, and a justified reason to use it. Their only response was a free market basis. People will choose who they want, and is it justified to do so because we have competition with the private lawyers? Several problems. We told you it's not equality before the law, but it's still based on non-arbitrary reasons. We told you that the non-indigent people can still pay for better quality lawyers. We told you that the indigent people will suffer because of this, and we also asked them how they would have money to support the subsidies that they sold. Their model doesn't